Hey team, this is Grant David Collins and welcome to Basement Philanthropy, a place for people who do not want to wait until they are rich or retired to create meaning, impact, and connection with their money, regardless of the amount. On this episode, we're going to get to view the Philanthropic Method in action with my friend, Katie Morse. So let's get started. If you think of the philanthropic method as only a framework, it can come off a little bit bland or boring. But when you start to layer on experiences and stories where that method has made the impact of someone's giving or philanthropy exponential, you start to really get into why having something like that in place with your personal giving can make such a difference. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I will link below the 4 podcasts that walk through the philanthropic method and why it is so important to giving. But when I first met Katie at a housewarming party, it was really clear that she was interested in giving. And I just experienced that time and time again as I got more and more involved with her and this particular project. Now, Katie is a physician's assistant by profession, and so she is no stranger to applying the scientific method in her work. And so she was just a natural at applying the philanthropic method to her giving. I'm so excited to be able to share this podcast with you. It's one of my favorites that we've ever recorded, so let's jump into it. So what I would like to do before we get into the specific experience, which was helping your grandparents winterize their home. That's kind of the high level, this is what happened. I want to get some context around who these people are to you, how they showed up in your life. And so I would just love it if you could give us a little bit of context around these 2 figures that likely have played a pretty big role in who you are.
Yeah, so they're actually not my grandparents. I'm not blood related to them. And their names are Tony and Darlene, just for referencing them. And when I was 6 weeks old, we moved into the house across the street from them. And shortly after that, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. Okay. And she's fine now, so not a sad story. Yeah. But, Yaya, or I call Darlene Yaya, that's grandma in Greek. She's Greek. And she just requested to be my mom's visiting teacher. And, it just kind of spiraled from there. They became like surrogate grandparents.
Wow. So, and for those who are not familiar with the kind of that visiting teacher like wording, basically it's a sister from the church or a member of the church who's a woman who volunteers or is assigned, that's probably a better way of saying it, to be involved with this individual's life. And that can be a wide gamut of things. Like it is not only being involved with them from like a church perspective, but it's also being involved with them from like a helping perspective and a dinner perspective or a like caring perspective. And so that's how Darlene basically got introduced to your family, was because of this. But the interesting thing is that she requested it. So did she know your mom before?
No, she didn't. They actually met because my parents had built the house across the street. And I was born in December. So it's, the middle of January, freezing cold. My mom is out there holding me, like, helping pick out, I think, paint colors for the house. And Yaya was looking out her window and saw this woman with a brand new baby. She ran across the street. She's like, I know you don't even know me, but can I take your baby inside so she's not cold?
Oh, wow.
That's how they met.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, you're involved, or they become involved with your family from like a church perspective. Does she just remain your family's visiting teacher for a long time, or like how does that go from visiting teacher to like basically adopted grandparents? Like how does that happen?
Well, Yaya's Greek, so she's a very strong-willed person. And she, every time she saw a need, she just kind of forced herself in to help with it. And they're actually where I learned like the main idea of service. So like when I got my polio vaccine, and accidentally got the live version, I wasn't able to be home for a few weeks with my mom because she had cancer. I could have given her polio.
Oh, wow.
And so Yaya and Papa just watched me at their house for a few weeks. When my dad was out working or had conferences, like they would come and help with late night feedings, and they took care of me and my other siblings. They were there in every aspect beyond just church service.
Wow. So they are, in and out of your life in terms of like a daily. This isn't like a in and out of your life, but it's like they're just like this common thread, it seems like, that is in your life. And you said, or I know that you moved at 10 years old, right? So that home across the street becomes somebody else's, and you all moved to Highland. Do you just stay in touch because, Darlene is Greek and she's going to stay in touch, or how does that happen?
That's part of it, but the main part is at that point, they were my grandparents. I was their granddaughter. They were family, and we would see each other, at least every other Sunday dinner, and just stayed close.
Wow. Yeah, I was actually pretty surprised when I think it was Darlene that was, I was talking to her while we were over there, and somehow it came up that like you weren't like blood relatives. And I was like, what? Like, this is crazy, because just of how like deep I experienced that relationship to be for you. So it's just it's such a beautiful example of just, there doesn't need to be boundaries between people just because they're blood or not. Like, you can have such a big impact in people's lives, like regardless of that. So let's zoom kind of back into the specific experience that I wanted to speak into. And it really is going to highlight that kind of first step that we talk about in the Philanthropic Method, which is identifying and understanding a need. So how do you come across this need that you eventually get a bunch of us involved with?
Well, it was beginning to get cold. Remember, I think it was like October. And I was just over at their house, and Papa was sick, and he has a history of pneumonia and things like that. And so he's 87, and just mentioned that, like, he needed to winterize his yard. And I was like, well, I can come help you with it if you need. And he's like, I don't even know if I'll be able to do it this year. Like, you're so sweet to offer, but it's more than the two of us could do.
Yeah.
And that's where the idea started.
Got it. And to give some background, Tony is like, he's an avid gardener, avid like lawn guy from what I experienced. Like, has he always been that way?
He has, yeah. As in, so he and Yaya met in AA about 45 years ago, and he jokes that his garden is what keeps him out of bars.
Okay.
So yeah, he loves it. He spends all his time there.
Yeah. So you identify, hey, this is something that needs to be like done. And the beautiful thing about your interaction with these people is that the understanding phase, as far as understanding what's actually going on and how something can be impactful, your context and history basically made that like a pretty quick, like, okay, this is what I know needs to happen. This is what I know needs to be done. And we're going to go and do something about it. And for people who aren't as familiar with whatever they see in the world, sometimes that can be a little bit of a grind. And basically, you made that investment the years before in creating a relationship with these two individuals. And when we come across something that is brand new, we almost have to catch up in some respects to these types of things that we want to be involved with, as far as understanding what actually is the need that is happening here. So tell me how we go from, okay, my grandpa needs help winterizing his yard, to I'm going to get a bunch of other people involved with this.
It was kind of kismet, actually. It was that same week that you invited me to come to Tabitha's, right?
Yeah.
Pantry with you. And I just met you and all of your other friends, and I could tell they were super service-minded. And on my way home, the thought just honestly popped into my head out of nowhere to ask if you and your other friends were looking for service opportunities.
Yeah. And I remember the text that I got from you. It was something around the effect of like, hey, like, do you guys look for projects or those types of things? And basically you kind of presented this idea. And it was just, it's so fun to be able to just see those kind of ripple effects start to happen. When you just get involved with giving, more opportunities come to you. You described me and my friends as like giving, service-oriented people. I mean, I don't know if we would put that language to it, but that's exactly what happens, and why, as you get started in this space, you get more and more opportunities to get involved with giving, is because that experience wears off on you. Like you can't really take it off. And once you start getting involved with this work in a really meaningful way. And so I just love that, without us even realizing what we're doing, we're putting out in the world like, hey, we want to be involved with something that's bigger. And like you caught up on that. And then not only did you catch on to that, but my friends and I aren't the only ones that showed up. That branched into some of your friend group. And so was that kind of like a domino effect? You're like, oh man, maybe I could invite Grant and his friends, and maybe I can invite my friends. Like how did that all come about?
Yeah, it was essentially that way, that you guys were the first to come to mind on helping. I was trying to think of other people. I was like, maybe I could ask some of the like teenage boys that they have in their neighborhood to come help or things like that. But I wasn't sure who to ask. And I met you guys, and after that, I started to just set up the project and invited more and more people. Yeah.
And so what I see in the kind of this creation of a like impactful solution is I see a couple really powerful elements in that. So I want to hear from you, like how you started to piece that together. Like, okay, you see this need now as you're developing it, like tell me about the different elements that you include, and I'll probably have some follow-up questions about at least one of those aspects.
I think I started to piece it together the most when we met at the housewarming party, and 5 minutes in, we were talking about service opportunities with like service animals and dogs, and I said that sounds fascinating, and you invited me to it, and I started to kind of, I guess, subconsciously pick up on that, like you don't have to know somebody to begin to serve them or serve with them. That you just put that opportunity out there, conscious or not, and it attracts people.
Yeah.
And so after that, you invited me to another service opportunity, and it started to make me more comfortable with just reaching out to you guys, even though I didn't know you. It began to normalize just having other strangers help with service.
Yeah, yeah. So you, from my perspective on this project, you invited us to essentially help winterize your grandparents' yard, which consisted of us coming over, mowing the lawn, picking out the old plants, tilling the kind of garden boxes, pulling weeds, all those types of things. And, that's I would say that's a fairly common thing that people do growing up as far as serving. Like yard work is kind of an obvious piece. One thing that I wanted to speak into, though, is one of the key aspects from the very beginning was this concept that your grandparents were going to feed us. So is that something that you were about, or is that something that, like, as you said, hey, my friends are going to come over and help, and they're like, well, if they're going to come over and help, we're going to feed them. How does that come into the picture?
Essentially, the last thing you said, that my grandpa didn't even ask for help. I essentially had to force it on him. He's like, no, I can do it. And I was like, no, like my friends and I are coming. We'll show up Saturday at 2, like be ready. And so he kind of grumbled. He's like, okay, like, well, I can at least feed you guys. Cause he's not one that's able to like receive service. He's always serving others. So I think that was his way of like saying thank you and serving you guys in return.
Yeah. It was such a beautiful part of the experience from my side of the equation. And it was interesting because that was a part of it from the entire way through. And what I loved about it, and I love that you allowed that to happen too, because it could have easily just turned into another thing where it's like, no, look, you don't have to do anything. We're going to come over and serve you. But whether consciously or subconsciously, you saw like, hey, there's a little bit of Tony that is being taken from him here, right? Like if he had his way, he would want to winterize his own yard. Yeah. Like it's very clear from my interaction with him that that's how it would be. And so to give that up was probably challenging. And a way to be able to work through that or still feel a part of it was this experience around cooking dinner, being with the people that helped. And I just thought it was just this like beautiful, impactful part of the day. I was super excited about that from the very beginning, just because of the way that you spoke about it. But it really, for me, brought to mind that word of like really creating an impactful solution. Like it wasn't just about the winterizing of the yard. It was about what is Tony and Darlene's experience going to be from this? And are they going to feel lifted, or are they going to feel like a burden after? And I feel like that piece of the dinner after, for me, like that was a really interesting tie that allowed, from my perspective, for them to still feel part of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. So we show up on the day of the activity. And from your experience, how did that go? Like you obviously planned it and then we went about doing it. How would you describe like the experience?
I think overall the experience was so much more than what I was expecting. Because, I've been friends with a lot of these people for a few months, few years that showed up and helped. But like you and a lot of your friends, I mean, I'd met Cade for 2 minutes at his housewarming party and, send him a text saying, hey, like if you're willing to serve. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, do you guys need gloves? Do you need yard work? Like he was over the moon to come help. And it was overwhelming. Just the support, the love, the help, everything we were able to get done.
Yeah. So we came in and we did a bunch of different things. Another person who's been on the podcast, actually, Alex, came with me, one of my good friends. And Alex and I, mowed the lawn, edged the lawn, which I haven't been involved with for a number of years, but I had a lawn mowing company in high school. And so it just like brought back a bunch of nostalgia for me. And then we like rototilled some of these garden boxes. And for us, I'll just speak for Alex and I, because we talked about it after, it was so nice to get back out and to do some like yard service. Because when you're in college or even post-college, you don't usually live in places that have yards. And there's just something like beautiful about that type of work. And so for us, I'll just speak for myself, I just felt so fulfilled during that experience. It was just like such a fulfilling experience that we were able to have. And as you are observing that from your end, was there anything that you felt like if you were going to go back and do it again that you would have changed or switched or created differently?
I don't think so. No, I think everything turned out, like I said, so much better than I was imagining.
Yeah. It was beautiful. I especially, and I talked a little bit about this, I loved the after portion where we just got to sit down as friends and then with your grandparents and just like get to know them a little bit better. It's so often that service turns into this like drive-by situation where you get in, you get out, and like job well done, everybody. We had a day and, we're going to move on with our lives. And I loved the hour or hour and a half that we had after to be able to just get to know your grandparents a little bit better. And they're so kind and just so inviting. I'm actually Greek a little bit myself.
Oh.
And so I feel like that's probably why we connected a little bit more. But it was, I really, really enjoyed it. So tell me about what happened after we all left.
After you guys all left, honestly, Papa started to tear up.
Wow.
Yeah, he looked out over the yard and he's, Marine from Korea, super tough, all of that. And just looked out over his yard and he just started to tear up and he's like, I can't imagine what you guys did. Like, I never would have been able to do this myself. And for days afterwards, when I would come see them, he and Yaya both would be like, we just keep looking out the window and we're so grateful.
Wow.
They spend their lives serving other people that it's, I think, weird for them. They forget what it's like to have people serve them.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And when we talk about like measuring impact, sometimes it's going to be in dollars or donations or those types of things that are like more quantitative, right? Like we can put like a number to something. But there's also these other things that are more like the softer side of the equation. And especially when you're involved with personal giving, those relationships and the experience that you have after it's done is really where impact is measured. And another question I have around it is, tell me how you, like what your experience was after that. Like, was there anything you would add? I know you talked a little bit about it, but is there anything that you would add to that?
I think my experience afterwards was just very similar to theirs, just having that like eyes opened to the fact that there are these types of people out there and the impact that service had. I mean, for me, I was just, almost like you said, kind of expecting a drive-by service. I didn't want these people to take a ton of time out of their day, out of their lives to just come help is what I was expecting. And it turned into just this beautiful service opportunity where I got to meet new people and make closer friendships. And it was incredible.
Yeah. You have such an interesting spot in this whole thing, because although you were giving, like you were also receiving. And so like there's like, it's usually like cut and dry, like, okay, we have the, giver and receiver. And you were just kind of mashed all in the middle of all of it. That has to be that's an interesting place to be in the whole equation. When you think about this experience, tell me, and for the audience, like what you've learned, or how you are different because of that experience. This doesn't have to be anything like crazy profound, but I'm just wondering if something's changed in the way that you view service or giving or philanthropy as you worked through that experience that we've just talked through.
I think it's a lot about what you explained before, how there's an impact that's like, monetary or financial, and there's the impact that's softer, I think you said, to use your words. And, in medicine, I see it where like, I help the patient or, support them like emotionally or empathize, and they're super grateful. And I see that like softer impact that I can have for them, which is part of why I love medicine, but it's not often reciprocated. Like, I feel good. I feel happy that I can serve people. But then going out and seeing, like hearing your perspective, especially that you're providing service and yet it was touching to you on a profound level. And it just kind of opened my eyes that, service is more than just giving something to someone else. Like you receive a lot more in return, I think, than I've experienced throughout my life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. There's just this fulfillment that comes into your life when you're involved with this type of work. And I talked about this a couple podcast episodes ago when I talked about gratitude and giving. And we just live in this just hyper-focused world on ourself. And we're all looking for the next hit or the next, thing to buy or whatever that might be. And we're searching a lot of times in vain, because after we get, that next hit, we got to go find it again. And being involved with other people is, from my experience, one of the only ways that I have essentially been able to pull myself out of that. And to be able to say, when someone says, "Hey, Grant, like, how are you doing?" Instead of saying like good or bad, I really just am able to answer with like, I'm just fulfilled. I'm fulfilled in my life. And that doesn't mean that I don't still have dreams or goals that I want to accomplish. That doesn't mean I still don't have bad days that show up. But when you get involved with being a force for good in other people's lives, that focus on self is diverted. And for me, it just opens up number one, how grateful I can be for my own life, and then how much I have to be able to give to other people. Closing out, Katie, is there anything as you were kind of thinking about this podcast, as we've been talking today, that you would want to share, or you would want to kind of speak into, just regarding the topic in general?
I think it kind of shows just the whole process, like you said, the philanthropic process, that, a lot of it for people is subconscious, but that for those that struggle to find service opportunities, that it can be a lot simpler than people think.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily ones that you have to seek out. It's keep an ear open for needs that people express, whether or not you know them, and then starting the process from there of just, always being on the lookout for service opportunities and having your heart open for that, and the universe manifests it if you're looking for it.
Yeah, that's so true. And if you can use a framework like the Philanthropic Method, those like serendipitous experiences become things that are so impactful, because you're creating it with intention, rather than just like throwing, caution to the wind, like, I hope this works, and like, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Having a little bit of that framework is just a really important part. The last question I have for you, Katie, before we wrap up here is, like, what would you say to somebody who is on the sidelines right now for one reason or another? What would you tell them about, based on your recent experiences with getting involved a little bit more in this work? What would you say to them?
I think the biggest thing I'd say to them is just to figure out why they're on the sidelines. Figure out what it is that they would want to do from service, what it is maybe that's holding them back. Well, if it's a fear, if it's not knowing how to do it, if it's being too busy, and then to just find ways around that. And it ended up, like, for me that week, I was incredibly busy and kept having this thought in the back of my mind, like, you can ask other people to do this, or things like that. And I almost backed out on it, actually, because I was so busy and I was afraid, I think, of putting myself out there and asking for help. And I'm so glad that I didn't do that. And I think that holds a lot of people back.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more around that, Katie. It really is this fear of not feeling like you're enough, or just not like being able to identify what's holding you back. And then once you identify that, it's a fairly simple way to be able to get through that. You just start to say, okay, well, how could I get over that? Or how could I create something that would work for me around that? And so I love that you've shared that. Katie, this has been just amazing. This is the 4th time we've met, and thanks for coming down to the basement with me.
Yeah, thanks for asking me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm just going to close this off with a quick podcast outro. Well, team, that's it for me. Let's go out into the world and create good with the money in our pockets together. Talk soon.